I followed Edward for more than 10 years, clinging to him for over a decade. Every time he saw me, he impatiently asked me why I didn't just die. But when I really wanted to die, he held my hand with red eyes, begging me not to die. Is this considered a turn of fortune? I liked Edward. I knew it from a young age. In our neighborhood, he was considered the most handsome, so when we played house as kids, I always grabbed his leg to play his wife, and every time, he would dump me in the sandbox, but I never cried. I would slowly crawl out of the sandbox, sit to the side, hugging my knees, watching him hug his wife, pointing to the food made of sand she had piled up and saying, "Wife, you've worked hard." That's when I would smile and say, "Not hard." Later, my Mom would see me coming home covered in mud, and she would scold me, asking for an explanation. I would say, "It's not my fault, Edward is just too good looking." She would scold me for being infatuated, being a vain girl at a young age. But what could I do? If only I had been born blind, maybe I wouldn't have fallen for Edward. So, I tell myself, I am blind now. Some call this the law of attraction. Now I will start wishing in my next life not to meet Edward again. Will this wish come true the day I die? Oh, and by the way, have you ever tasted sand? Maybe it's better not to try. Every time I was pushed into the sandbox, sand would end up in my mouth. It was dry and gritty, truly unpleasant. My dad got into a car accident while driving under the influence. He died. Edward's dad happened to be in the car too and also died, killed by my dad. It rained on the day of the funeral. My mom held me and cried fiercely. I held my dad's photo, staring at a sea of black umbrellas. I had no real concept of death at that time. Mom just said Dad wouldn't come back, wouldn't hug Bertha, wouldn't have any more horseback rides with Bertha. I felt sad, tears sneaking out as I touched the photo of my dad in secret. But amidst those tears, Edward would come to my mind. His dad had also left. Would he be as sad as me? Would he hide and cry like me? So, when Mom wasn't looking, I sneaked over to Edward. The people around him gave me fierce looks, and I got scared, but I still wanted to find Edward. In my pocket, I had my favorite candy, the one Dad bought me. My dad said, eating candy when sad would make you happy, so I wanted to give the candy to Edward. I didn't want him to be sad, so, with an umbrella in hand, I searched and finally found him behind a bush. His eyes were red from crying. I took out the candy from my pocket, intending to give it to him, but the moment he saw me, his eyebrows furrowed tightly, looking really angry, maybe even angrier than when I used to cling to him. He rushed over, using all his strength to push me down. Both the umbrella and candy fell to the ground. I fell into the mud. My black skirt turned into a muddy mess. The raindrops hitting my face hurt a lot. I heard him say, "I hate you. You took my dad away. Why don't you just die?" After saying that, he kicked me, then ran away. Edward is bad. I like him, but he hates me. I wanted to make him happy, but he wanted me to die. Oh, I was really sad at that moment. I sat on the ground, picking up the candy one by one. My palms were covered in mud, and the candy wrappers were also soiled. I unwrapped one, put it in my mouth. The candy was clean, but Dad lied. Even with candy, Bertha still felt so sad. Bertha missed Dad. Can Dad come back to hug Bertha once more before leaving? I made my way back, covered in mud. Why do I always end up dirty whenever I see Edward? Mom saw me crying even more fiercely this time. Her red, rabbit-like eyes cried and screamed. Someone told Mom about Edward pushing me. She cried, apologizing to me, saying it was our family that owed it to Edward. Oh, so Edward isn't a bad kid. He hates me for a reason. He wants me dead for a reason too. We moved to a new house, a smaller one. The first day we moved in, Mom crouched down, looking at me with red eyes. She said, "I've wronged my Bertha," but I didn't feel wronged. I reached out and touched Mom's head, saying, "Bertha likes it here, even though we don't have my good friends here, no Edward either, but Bertha is a grown-up now and should stay with Mom, protect Mom in place of Dad." I'm back. In high school, Mom got a job transfer, so we moved back to the original city, but our living situation was different. I couldn't see my old friends or Edward. It made me a bit sad. And my pace in cleaning the new house slowed down. Isn't it strange? It's been so many years without seeing Edward. He might have even forgotten about me, but I still remember him. Still want to be friends with him, but he said he hates me. Wait, doesn't hating someone mean it's hard to forget about them? Oh, Mom just started yelling at me. She says I clean the windows like a tortoise. Tortoises are cute. I will definitely keep 2 tortoises in the future, one named Bee, the other named Edie. Tortoises live for a long time. If I keep them together, they can stay together for a long, long time. Okay, I need to stop fantasizing about cleaning windows, otherwise the cloth in Mom's hand will definitely appear on my head in the next second. I saw Edward again on the first day of transferring schools. I was so happy, so happy. I saw him and instantly forgot he hated me. I ran to the edge of the field, cheering him on. He turned when he heard my voice, but upon seeing me, his eyebrows furrowed. He seemed to dislike me greatly. I could feel it from across half the field. The next moment, a basketball smashed into me. My shoulder hurt. Could it be dislocated? Thankfully, it didn't hit my face. See, Edward still hates me. I held my shoulder, looking at Edward as he walked towards me, standing in front of me against the light. Huh? He looked even better now, 100 times more handsome than when we were kids, but his expression was terrifying. His fists clenched tightly. He said, "Why are you here? Why don't you just die?" I felt sad. Despite being in high school now, why did Edward have to say such hurtful things? Violence is not the answer. Fine, Bertha needs to be more forgiving, not to hold grudges against him. I became Edward's desk mate. An arrangement by the class teacher. I was thrilled, but Edward was angry. He didn't seem to want to see me. While I was happy, I didn't want Edward to be unhappy, so I went to the class teacher. However, the teacher said there were no other available seats in the class, so I had to adapt to this one. I wasn't keen on it. In fact, I was a bit happy, but when I returned to the classroom, my chair was painted with various colors of paint. The table had several knife marks. My school bag was overturned, and books and pens were strewn across the floor, trampled with footprints. I knew who did it, so I quietly returned to my seat, picking up my school bag, wiping away the footprints on the books one by one, neatly tucking them back into the bag. Then, I used tissue paper dampened with water to clean the sea of the paint. I went to the next classroom to fetch a new desk. The desk was heavy. I stopped several times to drag it back. All the while, Edward sat at the nearby desk, watching me do all these actions. Then, without an expression, he kicked over my desk and chair. "Edward," I softly called him, "the teacher is coming. You'll be punished like this." He seemed surprised I would say that. A moment of astonishment before he jumped off the chair, stepped on my books a few more times, then turned and left the classroom. "Oh, books? I'm sorry. You were stepped on multiple times. I hope you can be as generous as me and forgive Edward. He's not a bad kid. It's our family that turned him into a bad kid." Mom found out I became Edward's desk mate. She seemed to realize something and her eyes turned red again. Mom was an emotional person who cried a lot. Every morning she would make 2 breakfasts, one for me, one for Edward. I noticed Edward's portion was always better than mine. My fried eggs were overcooked, but his weren't. I had 1 boiled egg, he had 2, sometimes. Even his milk had more milliliters than mine. I did the math. Bertha is a girl, she should watch her weight, eat less, but I couldn't tell Mom that every morning. She would painstakingly make breakfast that Edward threw into the trash, meaning the trash can was eating well, so I named that trash can Edward. So, when my mom asked, I could say, "Edward finished your breakfast again today." I didn't want to make my mom sad. She really didn't look good with red, puffy eyes, but wasting food is really shameful. So, later on, I started eating 2 breakfasts alone. I ate until my stomach was almost bursting, and I was too tired to focus in my morning classes. Oh, during that time I gained a few pounds. Mom thought I was getting fat because I was secretly buying snacks outside. She cut my allowance. I was so sad because I couldn't afford the novels I liked anymore. It's all Edward's fault. But then I thought about when I used to visit Edward's house when I was young. It seemed like his dad cooked breakfast. Now that his dad is gone, I wonder what Edward does for breakfast. Thinking about that made me less angry. I just told Mom that Edward and I were both on a diet, so we were eating very little for breakfast. It turns out Edward had always been number 1 in our class, but accidentally, I took away his first place. I felt sorry. Edward must hate me more now. Sure enough, when the class monitor handed me back the test paper, the look on his face was so complicated. When I took the paper, I realized someone had drawn several lines with a pen, the ink had smudged, and the paper was torn. Edward was such a sore loser. I had done it accidentally, and I decided to never take first place again. The class teacher found me and Edward. She asked Edward why he did that. Edward just turned his head and didn't answer. What a stubborn boy. I quickly grabbed the teacher's hand and explained, it wasn't Edward. It was me feeling too much study pressure. The teacher looked incredulous. I hugged her hand and coaxed her. It really wasn't Edward. Teacher, please don't blame him. In the end, she couldn't resist me and let Edward go. After Edward left, she held my hand and earnestly said, "Bertha, if you're bullied, you must tell the teacher." The class teacher was so kind, 100 times better than Edward, but I felt guilty for lying to such a good teacher. I couldn't tell her that Edward was mean to me because I owed him a lot. Later on, I never achieved first place again, always second. You should praise me for being so good at controlling my grades. A girl was standing at the stairway blocking me. She was dressed strangely, with purple-dyed hair. "Are you Bertha?" I nodded, wondering how she knew my name. In the next moment, she grabbed my collar. Why was a girl so scary? She looked at me, eyes wide with anger. She seemed really mad, but I didn't know why. Why would a girl be so angry? "Did you throw away the gift I gave you to give to Edward?" She asked angrily, "Who the hell do you think you are?" It's impolite to throw away someone's gift, and Bertha is absolutely not someone who would do that. I shook my head and said, "It wasn't me," but she stepped closer, face full of rage. "Someone said they saw you sneaking back to the classroom after school, and you still say it wasn't you. What does sneaking back to the classroom have to do with throwing away a gift?" I didn't understand. Besides, I was just going back to the classroom to give the gift. If you want to be friends, shouldn't you give birthday gifts? But Edward hated me. To avoid the gift getting thrown away to his face, I had to sneak back to the classroom after school and stuff it into his desk. What else could I do? So, I shook my head even more vigorously. It really wasn't me, but she seemed even more angry, grabbed my collar, dragged me to the stairway, and then let go, giving me a shove in the chest. Liars deserve to be punished. In that split second of weightlessness, before I could react, how many steps did I fall down? I didn't know. I didn't bother to count. I just knew my whole body hurt. My head, hands, body, legs, every part was in pain. In a daze, I heard the girl's voice. Surprisingly, she could make such a sweet sound. She said I had accidentally fallen, and she tried to grab me but missed. In my heart, I cursed her. Who lies with eyes open during the day? I cursed her with bad karma. But then, I heard a cold chuckle, a laugh I knew too well. He said, I deserved it, so I was the one to receive bad karma. I had forgotten. Edward hated me the most. He probably wished I were dead, but he would be disappointed. I just felt the pain all over, without any signs of dying. There seemed to be something flowing out of my eyes. Oh no, I had become a crybaby like my mom, but Bertha wasn't a liar. The surveillance at the stairway was broken. Edward lied. He told the teacher I had fallen down the stairs by myself. He said he saw it and could testify. I felt a bit angry, a bit indignant. So, Edward could lie without even blinking? Lying must make one a bad child. I decided to dislike him for a moment. The girl got punished in the end. A younger student came forward as a witness. Indeed, there are more good people in this world. Bullies always get their lessons. I deliberately found him after school to invite him for a milk tea, but he was so dense. He insisted on finishing his homework in class before going home. So, I sat next to him and waited. You know what? That younger student was really cute. Edward was handsome. But the younger student was adorable. He finished his homework quickly, so I didn't have to wait long. I asked him which milk tea shop he wanted. Instead, he asked, "Why did you fall down the stairs and still walk so fast?" I asked him what toppings he wanted in the milk tea. He responded, "Does this have preservatives? Will it cause cancer if I drink it?" I fell silent. I ordered 2 cups of pearl milk tea. Pearl milk tea was really delicious. When I handed it to him, he resisted at first, so I poked the straw, placed it in his mouth, and said, "Suck." He was surprised and took a sip, then his eyes lit up. Come on, who could refuse a boy with 2 dimples when he smiles? But as I watched him, I felt a little sad. I had never seen Edward smile. He was always stern with me. I wondered if he liked pearl milk tea. Well, maybe I shouldn't have brought milk tea for Edward. I quietly dragged the mop for a long time. Wait a minute, wasn't I supposed to be mad at him? Oh well, Bertha should be gracious. Edward fell ill. He was lying weakly on the desk, cheeks unnaturally flushed. I gently reached out and touched his forehead. It was burning. That temperature would make Edward go crazy, right? But before I could withdraw my hand, Edward grabbed it. He squeezed my wrist tightly, causing me great pain. Who has such strength when they are sick? Who allowed you to touch me? You're sick. How dare you touch me? Edward glared at me, looking disgusted. His grip was so painful, as if my bones would crush. I had no choice but to smile and apologize. Finally, he let go of my hand and went to the restroom, as if I were incredibly filthy. But I take a bath every day. Even my hands were fragrant after applying hand cream. Oh, maybe he didn't like the scent of this hand cream? Then I'll switch to a different one. How about a cherry blossom scent? Edward didn't like taking medicine when he was young, and he still doesn't, but it's necessary when you're sick. Not taking the medicine could lead to serious consequences, even death. If he died, his mother would be so devastated. I secretly brought medicine from home to school. Since Edward didn't want me to touch him, I poked his jacket with a ruler, whispering, "Edward." He didn't respond, so I continued, "Can you please pay attention to me, Bertha? Are you getting impatient with life?" He finally turned around to acknowledge me, though still looking fierce. I quickly handed him the medicine and extended my other hand's palm to him. "Edward, you need to take your medicine. Since you hate me, I'll let you hit me once. How about that?" Edward was stunned. Seizing the chance, I licked my lips and negotiated with him. "But can you hit me gently?" I'm afraid of pain. His expression was complex. He stared at my face for several seconds before finally letting out, "You're crazy." That insult was pretty low, totally unlike his usual fierce self. Nevertheless, he threw the medicine back at me. Dealing with a stubborn boy who doesn't like taking medicine and doesn't listen was really difficult, so I sneakily stuffed the medicine into his backpack before school ended, and I wrote a note stuck on top: "If you don't take the medicine, next week, I'll be clinging to you every day." Later, I fell ill. The medicine tasted too bitter, and I didn't want to take it. Edward sat beside my sickbed, dividing the pills one by one and placing them in my hand. Due to the pain all over my body, I couldn't move a muscle, and my mouth was tightly shut. I heard him choking back tears as he said to me, "Bertha, take your medicine. If you take your medicine obediently, I won't bother you anymore." Sigh. Edward has been pretending to be the first for so many years. He's even copying my reasons for persuading people to take medicine. 1-4. Edward recovered from his illness quickly, probably because he obediently took his medicine. Bertha is an honest and outstanding female student, so I have to keep my promise. 1-5. The first day without bothering Edward, I went downstairs to find a junior student. This junior student is such a bookworm. While others are goofing off during break time, he is buried in his homework. I knocked on the window next to him. He was startled, jumping up from his chair for real this time. I was stunned, then started laughing while holding my stomach. I kept laughing until he blushed and asked me to stop laughing in a low voice. I just kept laughing. He even opened the window and asked me to stop, but I couldn't. So, he covered my mouth with his hand, and I couldn't laugh anymore, but I blew a breath into his hand, causing him to jump up again, this time with his ears turning red with embarrassment. This kid is really fun to tease. I ruffled his hair playfully. "Come on, let me treat you to some milk tea." He blinked, looking a bit aggrieved. "But there's no milk tea sold in school." I smiled mysteriously. "See, you underestimated me, didn't you?" During lunch break, the two of us squatted by the abandoned basketball court, each holding a cup of fragrant milk tea, sipping away. I raised an eyebrow at him. "Nice, isn't it?" He nodded quickly and swallowed a mouthful of coconut jelly. "But isn't it against the rules to bring snacks to school?" I patted his shoulder mysteriously. "There's always a hidden corner in school." The junior student gave me a big thumbs up in admiration. Just when I was about to boast, a shadow suddenly appeared behind the wall, making me lose my expression for a moment. But then, today doesn't seem to be the day. The first day without bothering Edward. Edward tattled on me. Edward really isn't trustworthy. The junior student's name is Nial. It really suits his image. The second day without bothering Edward, I tripped and fell during gym class, face planted on the ground. I ruined my appearance, but at least I saw Edward smile, even if it was a mocking smile. The third day without bothering Edward, Nial also mocked me. The little angel has changed. I'm really feeling sad. The fourth day without bothering Edward, oh no, I've corrupted Nial. Now he's hiding snacks, even though they're meant to comfort me. We were back at the abandoned basketball court, and guess what? We got caught by Edward again and reported. The fifth day without bothering Edward. Why does it feel like Edward is appearing in front of me more often? This must be a test for me. No, I must keep my promise and stay far away from him. So boring, so boring. It's been it's been a week without bothering Edward. I survived, striving to improve Edward's favorability and become friends with him. At the end of the semester, favorability points, -1. Let's change the perspective. Dislike points, 9999999. Well, I'm now in my senior year, but Niall transferred to another school. He seems to have gone abroad. I'm really sad. I feel even sadder than when Edward ignored me. It's hard to see a good friend leave without a proper goodbye. No one to have milk tea with me anymore. I wonder if they sell milk tea abroad. I'm feeling lost, spending all day hunched over my desk studying test papers. My happiness has run away. Are you that broken up over him leaving? Edward teases me, I can tell, but I couldn't be bothered to respond. But then, he suddenly placed a cup of milk tea on my desk. I sat up in surprise. Edward? For me? Buying me milk tea? Suddenly, the gloom lifted, my eyes sparkled. For me? He chuckled, a teasing sound emanating from his nostrils, with a hint of charm. Of course, I quickly inserted a straw and took a sip. How could I forget? Edward despises me. If he despises me, why would he buy me milk tea to drink? And why does the milk tea taste like mustard? I couldn't hold it back and spat it out. Then I started coughing violently. The floor was covered in stains, and I frowned. Cleaning the floor is such a hassle, but trying to be friends with Edward is even more exhausting. Tears streamed down my face, whether it was because of him leaving, or maybe it was the mustard making me choke. Senior year life is dull and fast-paced, endless test papers and little sleep. Gradually, my interactions with Edward became less frequent, but I still brought him breakfast, helped with his chores, even during his classes. I stayed awake to take meticulous notes for him. Although he still didn't want to talk to me much, he casually handed my carefully organized notes to others, but his attitude towards me wasn't as bad as it was at the beginning. It made me happy to think that maybe he doesn't despise me as much. Realizing this, I was overjoyed. A week before the final exams, my classmates gathered to discuss university choices for the upcoming entrance exams. They asked me which university I wanted to apply to. Before I could answer, someone spoke up. Bertha has such good grades, she must be going to University A. That's the best university. The group erupted with excitement and then naturally shifted the conversation to Edward. Edward has such good grades, he'll probably go to University A too. Then Bertha and Edward can continue their relationship from high school. There was another round of excitement among the group. I knew they were joking, but I couldn't help but stifle a smile. But in the next moment, a stoic Edward appeared. Continue our relationship? With her? A mocking scoff filled the air, tinged with disdain and boredom. You guys are really boring. The awkward silence fell over the group, then they dispersed. I stood there alone, looking at Edward, who had resumed his seat, watching him furrow his brows irritably. I realized that I was wrong. Edward still despised me. I thought it was just a temporary setback, but little did I know, the day before the final exams, Edward threatened me. His foot rested on my chair as he leaned in. Bertha, I warn you, don't choose the same university as me. Edward was so menacing. His expression seemed to suggest that if we ended up at the same university, he'd make my life hell. I felt a bit scared. I swallowed hard. I nodded in agreement. Edward remained the top student in the school, but I slipped down by 10 places. I think being frightened by Edward before the exams played a part in it. Edward didn't seem pleased when he saw the scoreboards, but he should be happy, shouldn't he? Now, even if I wanted to go to the same university as him, I couldn't, though seeing the scores still made me a bit sad, but it's okay, I can still go to my second choice. It's a local university where cherry blossoms bloom beautifully every year. Edward chose the best local university, even though he could have gone to a better university. He didn't. Many people didn't anticipate that, including me. I discussed this with my mother. She sighed and said, it may be because by staying local, he can better take care of his mother. It suddenly dawned on me, Edward's mother hasn't been well since his father passed away. My mom often had me deliver nutritional supplements to Edward's mom, leaving them at the door and running off without being spotted, but I was caught one time. I expected Edward's mother to scold me, but instead, she welcomed me into the house, gave me candy, and smiled at me. She said I must have had a tough time coming all this way. She said Edward has a good temper, and it must be hard for me to deal with him. She thanked me and said Edward is lonely, so I should keep him company. At that moment, I promised her. I told her I always found Edward handsome since I was young and always wanted to be friends with him, so I will definitely treat him well. She chuckled at my words and ruffled my hair. Oh dear, Edward's mother is so gentle. I was captivated by her beauty, but why does Edward have such a bad temper? He's so hard to figure out. I forgot to mention, the beautiful university with the cherry blossoms and Edward's local best university are the same university. After all, the university I wanted to go to the most is where Edward is going. Who would have thought that my first and second choices would match up like that? It must be fate. It seems Edward is destined to be stuck with me. I just wonder how he'll react when we meet at school. Will he be willing to listen to my explanations? The weather on the day of registration was scorching hot. I was dragging a suitcase down the road, feeling like I was about to have heatstroke. Wait. Why is there a mountain ahead? That's absurd. Oh, it's a human mountain, all girls, forming a circle for some reason. In the center, on a hot summer day, under the scorching sun, stood Edward pretending to be what at the center? I pouted and mentally criticized him for his smelly fart. Then he caught me in the act. Bertha. Edward's voice was so loud that it reached my ears even from a distance. The crowd's gaze turned towards me in unison. I felt socially dead, but I could only sheepishly carry my own luggage and run up to him. Edward, let me analyze for you the coincidence of both of us applying to the same school. I spoke while looking up at him. Wait, why did he look so indifferent? Wasn't he supposed to be really angry? He looked down at me with his eyes half closed. Carry the suitcase for me. I immediately flashed him a professional smile and said, so, mister, after I help you with your luggage, does that mean we are good friends in college? He thought for a moment and then said, oh no, did Edward spend the summer practicing at a temple? He became so kind, but what made me sad was that his kindness only lasted a moment. The next second, as if he suddenly realized something, his expression changed like he had eaten a fly. He walked ahead without looking back. I felt upset. It was a hot day when we arrived, and I was running in the heat with 2 suitcases and almost got heatstroke. But why was Edward's suitcase so light? The university was indeed beautiful. My roommates were nice. The best part was that we only had one 8 a.m. class per week. I could sleep in. I had few major courses, so most of my free time was spent going to the neighboring college to find Edward. Edward's attitude towards me was still indifferent, but that was okay. After half a semester of effort, I had infiltrated the enemy camp, made friends with his classmates, and built good relationships. So, later on, when Edward formed a team to work on a project, he asked me to help him, to help his team with breakfast. He smiled and said to me, "Since you have such a good relationship with my friends, you shouldn't mind taking on this task." He was clearly smiling, but I shivered inexplicably. In the end, I nodded in agreement, so my lazy mornings were no longer the same. Once while delivering breakfast, a few people from the team asked me if I liked Edward. I thought seriously for a moment. Edward was good looking, and I wanted to treat him well. I had been used to following him around since childhood, so, for so long, I must have liked him, and that's how it went. The team's project, led by Edward, continued for 3 years. Bertha, the delivery girl, faithfully delivered breakfast for 3 years, deserves an award. After a team gathering, a few people got drunk. I went downstairs to buy mineral water for them. On my way back, I overheard Eric asking Edward. He asked Edward if he liked me. Almost without hesitation, Edward said he did not like me. I lowered my eyes, tightening my grip on the water bottle. Eric, having received an answer, then said he didn't believe him. If Edward didn't like me, why did he keep me around all the time? Next, I heard a laughter. Raising my head, I saw Edward looking indifferent, saying, "A free and naive workforce is not to be wasted." Eric seemed angry. He stood up momentarily to say something, but then caught sight of me in the corner. Bertha, all eyes shifted to me. Everyone seemed embarrassed, but I didn't want them to feel awkward for my sake. So, I pursed my lips and walked over, placing the water on the table, and smiled at them. "Eric, what are you guys talking about? That's so exciting." My peripheral vision then landed on Edward. Unlike everyone else, Edward's expression remained unchanged. He just sat there, devoid of guilt or remorse. My head began to ache. I pinched the soft flesh of my palm silently. It's okay. It had been like this for years. Bertha should have already been accustomed to it. After that, I continued to interact with them as usual. Initially, some in the team would subtly observe my emotions, but after some time and realizing nothing was amiss, they reverted to the usual way of interacting. The atmosphere in the team was good, and so were the people, so being treated as free labor was not all bad. Not only did I make many friends, but I also learned a lot of things. However, ever since that one time when Edward hurt me, I always had headaches. My roommate said it was due to my staying up late using my phone. She even mentioned that in the dead of night, she could see light emanating from under my blanket. I tried to explain that it was just a small night light I had forgotten to turn off. So, she fell silent, looking at me. "All right, from today onwards, early to bed, early to rise." It seems I really did spend too much time on my phone. My eyesight seems to have deteriorated. When it was Edward's birthday, I woke up very early to personally make a cake. I accidentally burnt my hand, but everyone praised my cake as beautiful, especially Eric, who noted that I had made great progress. He said this cake was much prettier compared to the one I had gifted him last time. My face blushed with a hint of guilt. At that time, he had no special gifts on his birthday, only a trial cake. I was about to tell him that I would make a better one next time. A muffled sound interrupted me. The cake I made was overturned by Edward and fell to the ground. My meticulously decorated Q-version characters were now in disarray. The burnt area on my hand stung. I tried to stay calm and asked Edward why. He just shrugged, saying, "Too ugly. I don't want it." The people around him were angry, though they were Edward's friends. They were willing to stand up for me. Look, there are still good people in the world, but among all these good people, why is there no Edward who doesn't vandalize public property, waste food, tell lies, play pranks, or bully others? I didn't usually hold grudges, but I felt so wronged at that moment. Bertha was not feeling so generous. I wanted to comfort myself as before, but after thinking for a while, I couldn't muster a word. So the next day, I didn't deliver breakfast. I slept in. After class, some people from the team found me. They wanted to apologize on Edward's behalf. They explained that the project encountered some issues, which had put Edward in a bad mood. I listened quietly to their explanation and then looked up at them with a smile. "It's okay, we will always be friends, and I will still bring you food when I have time." They looked at me and smiled back. But I realized that in that whole conversation, I hadn't said a word about Edward. A few days later, I met Edward at school. He seemed like he had something to say to me, but I just averted my gaze, pretending I didn't see him. I woke up with a headache, couldn't sleep. Edward called me, asking me to meet him at the club. He said he had something for me. I arrived at the club, but they said I couldn't enter without an appointment. They asked me to call Edward to come out and receive me. But Edward wasn't answering his phone. I made several calls. Eventually, I lost the mood to keep calling. Ugh, such a boring prank. It was cold outside, like it was going to snow. I reached out to catch a snowflake. My fingers were already red, lacking sensation. I watched the snowflakes melt in my palm, and my vision blurred along with them. I suddenly felt so meaningless, after so many years. I suddenly didn't want to be with Edward anymore. I received a message from Edward's mother. She thanked me for growing into an optimistic and lovely girl. She thanked me for keeping her company and for being with Edward all these years. She said she was leaving. She said Edward was not a bad person. He just couldn't see himself clearly, so she asked me not to give up on Edward. But Edward had really hurt me, and I had decided a few days ago not to associate with him anymore. I might disappoint the beautiful aunt. But what did she mean by saying she was leaving? I suddenly remembered the bottle of fluoxetine I had seen in her room, an antidepressant. I abandoned everything and rushed out the door. I sat outside the emergency room, my hands covered in blood, Edward's mother's blood. Edward arrived. He grabbed my collar and asked me what I had done. Why did I go to his mother? He asked me if the harm our family had caused his father wasn't enough. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The emergency room's door opened. Edward hurled me to the ground, then hurried over. My head struck a nearby chair. It hurt, really hurt. My head felt like it was splitting open. I saw the doctor shake his head. I saw Edward's hands hanging down. I saw his hands were clean, but mine were covered in dried blood. Then, everything went dark. I woke up in bed. There was only a nurse beside me. She said I had hit my head, possibly causing a mild concussion. The specific examination results would take a few days to come through. I said okay. I ran into Nial. He appeared in front of me, greeting me, and I felt somewhat dazed. He had gotten taller. He was no longer in a school uniform but a coat and dress pants, yet he still wore those nerdy black frame glasses. He asked if I still remembered him. I nodded. You're Nial. He smiled so cheerfully, with two deep dimples. He said he had just returned from overseas yesterday and came to the hospital today to get some medicine because he was feeling a bit sick. He asked me how I ended up at the hospital. I instinctively looked at my hands, clean and tidy, probably washed by the nurses. I said there was nothing wrong, just here to wash my hands. He nodded and praised me for being clean. He is so naive, believing such an absurd reason. He said he went to the high school as soon as he got back to ask the teacher about the university I was planning to attend. He had planned to come see me today, but caught a cold. He didn't expect to run into me. I nodded and praised our deep connection, but then he suddenly fell silent. He bent down, bringing his face close to mine. Bertha, are you feeling upset? I was stunned by his question, and in that moment of hesitation, tears almost uncontrollably streamed down my face. Actually, there was no almost about it. Tears were rolling down one by one. Niall frantically rummaged through his pockets and found a handkerchief. Then he hurriedly wiped away my tears. Who still carries a handkerchief with them these days? I wondered. I told him, I feel so sad. His movements faltered, as if trying to think of comforting words, but couldn't find any. His ears turned red. Finally, he managed to say, "Do you want something sweet to drink?" I blinked, looking at him. He quickly explained that eating something sweet releases dopamine, which can make people feel happier. I blinked again. He scratched his head and said, "Whenever I feel sad, drinking bubble tea makes me feel a bit better." I had guessed right, but I didn't go buy bubble tea with Niall. I was in a hurry to go home. When my mom heard the news about Edward's mom's accident, she was in the middle of cooking. She poured half a bag of salt into the pot. Her eyes turned red again. Later, she wiped the tears while looking at a photo of my dad. She said to him, "Edward, this child is so pitiful. Our family owes Edward too much. I've known since I was little that our family owes Edward a lot. So even if Edward is mean to me, I won't hate him." Niall came to school to find me. When he couldn't find me, he sat quietly on a bench in the library, watching the crowds pass by. Luckily, I wasn't that into studying today, so I had come out early. His eyes lit up when he saw me. Just like the first time we had bubble tea together. I asked him why he was sitting there without moving. He said he was waiting for me. I asked why he didn't contact me if he was waiting for me. He said he didn't have my phone number. I said, "Are you here to ask me out?" He said yes. It took him a few seconds to realize what he had admitted to. He blushed, stuttered, and awkwardly repeated, "Yes." Niall came to find me again, but this time, he had my phone number and was smart enough not to just sit there awkwardly. He set up camp with bubble tea under my dorm building. I took a sip, and he looked at me with shining eyes. "Is there something on my face?" I asked. He shook his head. "Do you want to drink some?" He shook his head. "Did you make it?" He paused for a moment, then nodded quickly. I raised a thumbs up to show my approval, and then, he smiled. Have you ever seen a golden retriever smile? The way Niall smiled at that moment was just like a golden retriever. I couldn't resist patting his face while looking at that smile. When Niall texted me, I had just come out of the doctor's office. He asked if I had any plans for the weekend. I saw the message but didn't reply. When Eric texted me, I was standing in the hospital corridor. He said Edward's project team had achieved great success and invited me to the celebration party on the weekend. I saw the message, but again, I didn't reply. I feel like I'm about to die. No wonder I had been having constant headaches before, and sometimes I couldn't see things clearly. The doctor was nice. He saw me as a little girl and spoke kindly, trying to comfort me. He said, "We cut it early. If you get treated properly, you can live a few more years. So, it seems like I'll just live a few more years before I die." It's a bit comforting in a way. I feel somewhat sad. I've always been law-abiding, helpful, and never smoked, drank, or dyed my hair. I even try not to drink too much soda. I just love drinking bubble tea. How can I be dying at such a young age? Maybe it's just that fate is envious of talent. I'd rather be a bit less talented. Edward called. He said Edward got drunk and asked me to pick him up. I refused, then hung up. A few seconds later, he called again. This time, it was Edward's voice. He called me Bertha. He said, "Bertha, come pick me up." I was taken aback. It seems like Edward's situation is quite serious. He's so drunk that his mind is muddled. So I hurriedly asked for the address and rushed over. In the past, every time he got drunk at a party, it was me who had to take him home, but every time I dropped him off at the entrance of the residential area, he seemed somewhat sober. He would push away my hand aggressively and tell me to go away as far as possible, but the next time, he would still call me after the party, asking me to take Edward home, so I learned my lesson and became smarter. When I dropped him off at the residential area entrance, I would let go of his hand automatically, making sure he was somewhat sober, then wave goodbye, but today seemed different when we got to the entrance. There was no sign of him becoming more sober. I patted his cheek. "Edward?" No response. I patted harder. "If you don't wake up, I'll help you in." Still no response. Okay then, Edward was heavy, and by the time I got him onto his sofa at home, I was already out of breath. I saw a photo of Edward's mom on the TV cabinet. It had been a long time since I last saw his beautiful mom. I wish her well wherever she is, whether someone keeps her company or not. If no one does, that's okay. Bertha, in a few more years, you can go and keep her company. Auntie always loved chatting with Bertha the most, right? Edward seemed to be waking up, or maybe not. He called me Bertha again. I was startled, and water spilled everywhere. I accidentally spilled the scalding water on Edward, but he didn't get angry. He just reached up to touch my face. His eyes were so red. "I thought my mom would hate you," he said softly. I blinked in disbelief. Why would the beautiful aunt hate me? He seemed to find it absurd as well, and then he chuckled, "But as it turns out, you're the one she likes the most." I rolled my eyes silently. "Of course, everyone likes Bertha." "Bertha," he called me again. "Was I very mean to you before?" I nodded without hesitation, but he seemed not to notice and started counting on his fingers. "You threw your candy on the ground, hit you with a basketball, destroyed your desk and chair, tore your test paper, watched others push you down the stairs, mocked you when you got hurt, smashed the cake you made you bump into the chair." I covered his mouth. "Stop, my head hurts." "And can you even count with only 10 fingers? But he grabbed my hand, moved it away, and stared at me with unwavering eyes. "Bertha, I am truly a horrible person." I nodded speechlessly. He suddenly seemed a bit aggrieved. "But you always have so much fun with Nial, and ignore me. You even bake cakes for other men. Now, it seems like I'm the one with the problem in the head, not him, right? He's not normal. I need to stay away from him." I got up to leave, but at that moment, he moved and hugged me from behind. His head rested on my shoulder. "Sorry, Bertha. I'm sorry. You can hit me, scold me, demand everything back from me, as many times as you want." As he spoke, his voice choked. "Can you not hate me?" I sighed. Ultimately, I patted his hand. "Edward, I can't hate you, otherwise, I would hate you to death." He froze. He seemed deeply hurt, but why should I care? "I'm almost dying, right?" Edward came to the dorm area entrance to find me. I didn't go out. My head was pounding. I heard it was raining suddenly outside. With so many admirers on campus, it's certain someone would help him with an umbrella. Edward bought a cake. It looked exactly like the one he dropped at the birthday party. I didn't eat it. I gave it back to him to take to their team. "I painted this one better than this," I said, but I didn't drop it. Food should be treasured the most, but Edward's expression was still gloomy. I took a leave from school to go home. The counselor asked me why I took leave. I said, "I miss my mom." Mom found out too, as she handed me a bag. All the carefully worded things I had prepared beforehand were no longer needed. I used to say that Mom cried like a rabbit. Now, there are 2 rabbits lying on the bed. The little rabbit touched Rabbit Mom's nose, saying, "Mom, look, do we look like 2 rabbits?" The mom's hand was warm as she touched the little rabbit's head. Her eyes were red and she said nothing. "Mom, do you think Dad misses Bertha?" When we were little, you and Dad always asked who I liked more, Mom or Dad. I secretly told Mom that Bertha loves Mom more, so Bertha wants to stay with Mom for a long time. Dad is a man, so it shouldn't matter if he's alone. But if Mom is alone, Bertha can't bear it. Dad loves Bertha and Mom so much, he will definitely agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you more. Dad loves Bertha so much, he loves Mom so much, he will agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you. Mom, Dad will agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you. Dad will agree. Mom, Bertha will listen. Dad will agree. Mom, Bertha will. Mom, Dad will. Bertha Lise, Edward came to the dorm area entrance to find me. I didn't go out. My head was pounding. I heard it was raining suddenly outside. He must have plenty of admirers on campus who would help him with an umbrella. Edward bought a cake, exactly like the one he dropped during the birthday party. I didn't eat it. I handed it back to him and he took it back to their team. I painted this better than the other one, I said, but I didn't drop this. Food should be cherished the most. But Edward's expression still remained sullen. I took leave from school and returned home. The counselor asked me the reason for my leave. I said, I miss my mom. Mom found out too, as she handed me a bag. All the carefully worded things I had prepared beforehand were no longer needed. I used to say that Mom cried like a rabbit. Now, there are 2 rabbits lying on the bed. The little bunny touched the rabbit Mom's nose and said, Mom, do we look like 2 rabbits? Mom's hand was warm as she touched the little bunny's head. With red eyes, she said nothing. Mom, do you think Dad misses Bertha? When we were little, you and Dad always asked me who I liked more, Mom or Dad. I secretly told Mom that Bertha loves Mom more, so Bertha wants to stay with Mom for a long time. Dad is a man, so it shouldn't matter if he's alone. But if Mom is alone, Bertha can't bear it. Dad loves Bertha and Mom so much, he will definitely agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you more. Dad loves Bertha so much, he loves Mom so much, he will agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you. Dad loves Bertha so much, he loves Mom so much, he will agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you. Dad loves Bertha and Mom so much, he will agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you. Dad loves Bertha so much, he will agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to the doctor. It doesn't matter about the headaches, hair loss, or vision problems. Bertha just wants to be with you. Mom, Dad will agree. Bertha Lise, Edward came to the dorm area entrance to find me. I didn't go out. My head was pounding. I heard it was raining suddenly outside. He must have plenty of admirers on campus who would help him with an umbrella. Edward bought a cake, exactly like the one he dropped during the birthday party. I didn't eat it. I handed it back to him and he took it back to their team. I painted this better than the other one, I said, but I didn't drop this. Food should be cherished the most. But Edward's expression still remained sullen. I took leave from school and returned home. The counselor asked me the reason for my leave. I said, I miss my mom. Mom found out too, as she handed me a bag. All the carefully worded things I had prepared beforehand were, I used to say that Mom cried like a rabbit. Now, there are 2 rabbits lying on the bed. The little bunny touched the rabbit Mom's nose and said, Mom, do we look like 2 rabbits? Mom's hand was warm as she touched the little bunny's head. With red eyes, she said nothing. Mom, do you think Dad misses Bertha? When we were little, you and Dad always asked me who I liked more, Mom or Dad. I secretly told Mom that Bertha loves Mom more, so Bertha wants to stay with Mom for a long time. Dad is a man, so it shouldn't matter if he's alone. But if Mom is alone, Bertha can't bear it. Dad loves Bertha and Mom so much, he will definitely agree. Mom, Bertha will listen to. Today marks the beginning of my treatment. The elderly man in the bed next to mine has been receiving treatment here for a long time. He has lost all his hair, yet he told me I should compliment him for not even having a single gray hair at his age. I think I should remove my wig first. Edward came by. He arrived just when my mom had stepped out for a bit. I had just finished chemotherapy and my whole body was aching, my face pale. I don't know if it was just my imagination, but Edward seemed completely devastated to see me in That stayed, as if someone had delivered a heavy blow straight to his heart. He asked me what was wrong. I told him I had a tumor in my brain, a malignant one. His expression seemed even more pained. His hands, clenched into fists on his knees, were trembling. So, I jokingly added, "You used to always ask me why I hadn't died yet. Well, now I can answer you. I think I'm close to dying. Sprinkling salt on wounds is something I can handle too." Squinting at him, I saw him tightly grip my hands. He looked up at me, eyes red and watery. He told me he had never thought about it like that before. He pleaded with me to stay alive. I said, "Remember when I rolled down the stairs and how dangerous that was? You said I deserved it." More salt on the wounds. Watching him in pain, I suddenly felt like I had gone too far. So, I pulled my hand back and just told him, "I'm tired. I heard Edward had recently started a business. This should be the busiest time for him. How does he still manage to come here every day? My mom worries about his health. But he says he's fine. My mom always sets aside time for me and him to be together. So, when he handed me an apple that day, I didn't take it. I smiled and told him, "I'm not going anywhere tomorrow, so you don't have to come every day. I find you annoying." He paused for a moment. His eyes looked tired, his complexion worse than mine as a patient. He patiently peeled the apple into slices and set them aside, then tucked me in with a smile before putting on his coat from the back of the chair. As he was leaving, he said, "See you tomorrow." I couldn't bring myself to care about him. Niall visited. When he stood at the door, I didn't recognize him at first. He was wearing a suit and hadn't put on his glasses. His hair that should have been neatly styled was a bit disheveled from rushing. The moment I saw him, I realized it had been over a month since I last spoke to him. I hadn't told anyone at school about my hospitalization, including my closest friends, so Niall had no way of knowing. Feeling a bit guilty, I waved at him. "Hello, Niall." He would always smile when he saw me, but not today. His eyes welled up the moment he saw me. Before I could say anything, he rushed over and hugged me, his embrace trembling. I could sense that Niall had been going through a lot in this past month. He seemed like he had 1,000 words to say to me, yet in the end, he remained silent. Niall stayed with me for the afternoon. Despite his own sadness, he tried to make me laugh, but Niall, being a bookworm, wasn't very good at telling jokes. His jokes were old and boring. But I still laughed because his smile depended on mine. I liked his dimples. The frequent visitor to the ward gained another member, Niall, the joke teller with unamusing jokes and charming dimples. The weather was nice today. I said I wanted to go outside for a walk. Niall immediately got a wheelchair and pushed me out with my mom. There were many children on the hospital lawn, blowing bubbles. Turning to Niall, I said I wanted to join in, but where would a hospital have bubble solution? For sale? He glanced at my pouting lips, then at my mom's helpless expression, and finally looked at the children playing in the distance. I watched Niall walk towards the group of kids. I observed him become flustered as the children surrounded him. His tall stature crouched to their level, and he pulled out a lollipop from his pocket to barter with the kids. His pocket always held candy, for me. Every time I grimaced from the bitterness of the medications, he would bring out a lollipop, stripped of its wrapper, and offer it to me. Each taste was different. After a successful trade with the children, Niall ran back to me with bubble solution. I smiled as I took it, pulling out the bubble wand. I puffed out my cheeks and exhaled. Round, colorful bubbles emerged one after the other. Watching them refract the sunlight's myriad hues, I remarked to my mom, "They are so beautiful." Mom nodded in agreement, saying, "Yes, they are." But blowing the bubbles started to make me tear up a bit. Bubbles only lasted a few seconds before popping, existing for just a short while. As we returned to the ward, we bumped into Edward. He seemed anxious, with sweat on his forehead. His face only relaxed upon seeing me, but his gaze also landed on Niall standing behind me, feigning indifference. I told Niall, "I feel like sleeping now." He softly agreed, then adjusted my hair tousled by the wind outside and lifted me from the wheelchair. I held onto his neck as he placed me on the bed. When Niall laid me down, I averted my gaze. Edward had not moved since I entered. He stood there stiffly, like a fragile twig. His eyes were fixed on me, his fists clenched tightly. It was as though his nails were about to pierce into the soft flesh of his palms, blood flowing endlessly. I blinked, shifting my focus away. My vision was deteriorating, everything appeared blurry, but I didn't tell my mom. I was afraid she would sneak away to cry alone. Edward confessed that he loved me. I just nodded, not denying it. He said that because I used to cling to him and treat him well, he also loved me. Agreeing without words, he held my hand fervently, like a drowning person grasping the last piece of driftwood. His tear-stained eyes, his choked voice, he asked if I could love him again. Pulling my hand away, I tilted my head and questioned if he understood the difference between then and now. The two very distinct scenarios. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out to touch my eyes, desperately wanting to hold my hand again. "Just a fraction of your love would suffice. Please, Bertha, please don't be like this," he pleaded, with my vision even more blurred than before. I looked at him groggily, feeling irritated. I never threw your things. I never hit you with a basketball. I never made you wait for hours in the cold snow. I never caused you to fall unconscious from a head injury. Every sentence I uttered made his face grow paler. With his head bowed low and 5 fingers gripping the blanket tightly, he struggled to breathe. Edward, I'm not doing anything to you now. I just don't love you anymore. I pointed to my eyes. At first, I liked you because you were good looking. Then, I treated you well because I felt I owed you. But now, I'm going blind. I've spent the best of my time on you, Edward. I don't need to love you again. Suddenly, he froze in place. Stiffly, he raised his head. From the person opposite to me, I sensed a profound sense of pain and heartache emanating. He shakily reached out to touch my eyes. Finally, I closed them and turned away, refusing to look at him. Between Edward and me, there should have been an insurmountable feud, but our mothers loved one another, which made it all disappear. The obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome in those tragic love stories vanished from our lives. Yet, I used to love him, and now he loves me. The past and the present are different, so we still remain apart. Edward still came every day, as if nothing had changed. He would bring me flowers and unique things he saw on the way. But he would avoid the times Niall was around. He assured me I would get better, said he had plenty of time to make it up to me, to make me love him again. I paid him no attention. I thought he was going insane. Today, more hair fell out. I tugged at Niall to help pick a wig. The choices he made were peculiar, but I didn't point it out. As I peered at him closely while choosing a wig, I noticed his eyes were red. Today, I vomited again. My whole body ached, and I had bitten my lips until they bled. When Niall saw it, he asked me what was wrong. I replied that I had accidentally bitten my lip while eating. He didn't believe it, but still fed me my lunch one spoonful at a time at noon. Niall brought someone to see me. Later, I learned from the nurse that this person was a renowned doctor in the field, hard to get a hold of. As it turned out, Niall came from a medical background. Our bookworm Niall turned out to be a medical prodigy. While the person performed the examination, Niall stood by my side, lips pursed. His face showed no extra emotion, but when I touched his hand, I noticed how cold it was. After reviewing my reports, the person called Niall outside. They talked for a long time, and after what seemed like an eternity, Niall came back in. I knew my body conditions well enough on my own, but I couldn't bear to see Niall like that. He had cried earlier, but tidied himself up, trying to show a positive front to me. He smiled, patting my head, and told me my condition had improved a lot. Niall's smile looked painful. Even though his dimples were painted with sorrow, he still smiled. I nodded, allowing him to come closer. He obediently leaned in. I wrapped my arms around his neck, just like before when he had carried me. My sight was already becoming hazy, but I blinked in an attempt to see him clearer. I looked up and kissed his lips. His lips were cool, just like his hands. Then I kissed the corner of his mouth. They say a kiss can make everything better. Niall, this is my first time kissing someone, so you must not be sad. I couldn't see anything anymore. It hurt. It hurt so much that tears fell from my eyes. Niall kissed my eyes. A tear fell on my forehead, mixing with my own tears. When Edward arrived, I asked my mom to leave us alone. I called out his name. It was the first time I had spoken to him in so long. He hesitated for a moment before responding with a grunt. I asked him to take care of my mom for me. I said, "Look, you take care of my mom up there, and I'll take care of your mom down here. Isn't that fair?" He didn't answer me for a long time, unable to see anything. I pursed my lips and continued speaking. I said, "If you don't take good care of my mom, I'll hate you in the next life as soon as I see you." Edward was indeed afraid of me hating him. He agreed to take care of my mom. His voice trembled as he agreed. Edward told me that the most painful thing in the world is regret, but he deeply regretted everything he had done to me. He regretted realizing it too late, when there was no longer a chance or time to love as he wanted. He said if he had another lifetime, he would love me properly from the very beginning. I refused. I said in my next life. I had already chosen Niall, and I didn't want to see him. He fell silent for a long time. Finally, he smiled sadly and helplessly, saying, "It's okay, as long as I have a chance to truly love you once. That's all I need." Niall embraced me and told me funny stories that happened during his projects. I couldn't help but smile as I listened. I tugged at his clothes. "Niall, you have to become a really, really good doctor in the future." He laughed and pinched my nose, asking, "How good is really?" "Really good?" I thought carefully and said, "Good enough to cure me." The hospital room fell into silence. Niall kissed the corner of my mouth, choked up, but agreed. The weather outside has been good recently. I often asked Niall and my mom to push me out to soak up the sun, but as my health deteriorated, I had to settle for sunbathing through the hospital window. This world is so beautiful, and it's hard to let go. Honestly, I'm living quite happily. I have my mom who loves me. I have genuinely tried to be good to someone, to love someone, and there have been people who have truly loved me. I've eaten a lot of delicious food and been to many beautiful places. It's just the illness at the end that's a bit painful and dampens the spirits. I believe Edward will take good care of my mom. I also believe Niall will become a very, very good doctor. So, I'm living quite happily. Lately, it has been raining outside a lot. The rain falls gently. I ask Niall to read me the weather forecast every day because I don't want to choose a gloomy day. So, he secretly tells me that every upcoming day will be rainy. Niall is a goofball. Even though I'm blind, I'm not deaf. I can hear the birds chirping outside and the laughter of children in the distance. Niall tricked me. As punishment for biting him while kissing his lips, I told Niall that I had planned to write 88 chapters, almost like saying goodbye. But by this point, I had no energy left. I couldn't write anymore. I'm sorry. The sky cleared. Today was very busy at the office. Several people were arguing in the meeting. I didn't pay attention to what they were arguing about because my heart was beating rapidly, filled with panic and pain. I didn't know what was happening to me. When I picked up a glass of water, my hand trembled. The glass fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. The hot water splashed on my legs, causing a sharp sting. In that moment, my mind went blank, as if someone had ruthlessly hammered my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. Everyone in the room stopped arguing and looked at me. They asked me what was wrong. I didn't know what was happening to me. I just felt like a piece of me had been violently ripped away, leaving me confused and numb. It hurt until it was numb. The meeting ended. I hurried to the hospital. The car drove fast, as if something was urging me to hurry. As we passed by a flower shop on the way, the shopkeeper smiled and handed me today's bouquet. The flowers smelled lovely. I thought Bertha would surely like them. When I arrived at the hospital, I heard Bertha's mom crying in the ward. She was crying inconsolably, as if she had lost something dear to her. The flowers fell to the ground, petals scattered. I stood outside the door, suddenly unable to move, my limbs weak. The coldness deep in the wall pierced into my bones. There was only a wall separating me from her, but I knew I would never see her again. I stumbled down the stairs, unable to control my movements. The sharp edges of the stairs cut into my bones, one step after another. In the dim corridor, I crawled up from the ground, using my hands for support. It hurt so much. I covered my face and wept silently. I wondered how much pain Bertha must have felt when she fell, and yet I had callously said she deserved it. I returned to the office. I completed every task within my reach. My friend scolded me for working tirelessly without rest, saying it was like signing my own death warrant, but I couldn't stop. My heart hurt whenever I paused. I sat in the living room, staring at a photo of my mom for a long time. I thought about what Bertha had said. She wanted to help take care of my mom. Despite her own illness and shaking with pain, she still wanted to care for others. How much of a monster must I be to torment someone like her? I drank a lot of wine and remembered many things. I recalled high school, when I threw a ball at her, and she still greeted me with a smile. I was so angry at the time. I wondered why she could smile at me even after my dad had passed away. So, in a fit of anger, I said hurtful things. I was so childish. I remembered kicking her desk over, watching her pick up my lost belongings and place them in my hand without blame. I found her annoying at the time and wondered why she kept coming back. I remembered leaving her alone on the mountain during a school trip because I found her irritating, only to have her brought back by lowerclassmen in a mess. Upon seeing me, she simply handed me the belongings I had carelessly left behind. I remembered her kindness, her smiles, and how, time and time again, I took advantage of her kindness, until she stopped smiling at me altogether. Each sword thrust into my heart was pulled out with a brutal force, making me curl up in pain. It hurt so much. I was a monster, really. She should hate me, should detest me. Mom and her were right. I couldn't see myself clearly. I was despicable and self-righteous, immature and disgusting. I could never understand my own feelings. In high school, she was always with a boy from a lower grade. I looked down on her, ridiculed her for being fickle, and told myself I was free. Yet, I constantly wanted to know about them. One day, on the last day of our sophomore year, the boy came to see her when she wasn't there. He asked me to give her a letter and a handmade cup. He seemed serious, yet his ears turned slightly red. He made me promise to give the items to her before leaving. After he left, I opened the letter. It contained formal and cliché greetings, followed by contact information. I tore up the letter without emotion and threw it, along with the cup, into the trash. I laughed at how someone could go abroad and still think about her, their taste being so poor, during the college entrance exams. As I looked at the score rankings, I should have been happy because I could finally be rid of her, yet I wasn't, not at all. I was restless. This restlessness didn't ease until after I enrolled in university. Everyone said I should go to a better university, but I didn't. I convinced myself that I had to take care of my mom, so that's why I made that choice, even though there was a better university in the neighboring city. I was still deceiving myself. In university, I had her deliver meals to my team. I told everyone it was because she had free time and was there to learn. But only I knew that I wanted her to be constantly around me, to show others our relationship. When I heard her confessing her feelings for me to someone else, I should have felt restless, but I didn't. Instead, I smirked. I thought there was an insurmountable barrier of enmity between us. I belittled my feelings for her in arrogance and conceit. So, even when I realized something was off with myself, I continued to suppress it, pretending not to see. It wasn't until I saw the text my mom sent her that I truly understood. She had always been there for my mom. My mom liked her. I had never seen myself clearly. All those feelings I didn't understand and believed were hatred. Turned out, it was jealousy, possessiveness. I had fallen in love with her long ago. I am, truly, a complete jerk. One day, while under the influence of alcohol, delayed love emerged like creeping vines, entwining me tightly. I found her and suddenly remembered all the terrible things I had done to her. I asked her if I had been very mean to her. She nodded without hesitation. I recounted each wrong I had done, each one like a layer being ruthlessly peeled off my heart. It was the first time I heard the word hate coming from her. It pierced my heart with pain. For the first time, I realized how much it hurt to hear hate from someone else, especially when it was something I had said repeatedly to her. She was hospitalized. I couldn't find her for the longest time until I finally asked her mom. Her face looked awful, even though I had learned about her condition from her mom. I still clung to a glimmer of hope for one final confirmation, but that hope never materialized. She smiled mischievously, bringing up the things I had said and done before. Although those were words spoken from my mouth, hearing them again felt like a kind of repeated torture. It turns out I was so excessive. My heart ached with bitterness. Rising up to my throat also tasted bitter. Who will help me? Who will tell me what to do? I started deceiving myself again. I told myself that she would be fine, deceiving myself to the point of feeling disgusted, only realizing after losing her that I wanted to love her. How despicable. I visited her every day, always thinking about what she liked, wanting to give her everything. But when I saw those things, I froze. Only then did I realize, after all this time, I didn't even know what she liked. I saw someone by her side taking good care of her, loving her well. Suddenly, I felt so jealous. He has been loving her purely and cleanly since high school, and me, I have not. Night after night of insomnia, I stared at the pitch-black roof, and my heart would inevitably ache suddenly. I asked myself if I was trying to atone? No, that's not it. I just wanted to love her properly once. Who lets others bully them for so long? If I don't fight back, I'll have to leave. Nial's epilogue. Bertha talked to me about her childhood today. After she finished, she pestered me to share mine with her. I am not good with words, unsure of how to describe. So, that night while she was sleeping, I went to the study. I tried to write something to share with her. Yet not a word was written. The days before I met her were unremarkable. I didn't know what to write. Most of the interesting and vivid memories I have are related to her. I was born into a family of doctors, so from birth, I carried the expectations of various people. School, extra classes, learning pharmacology, little play, few friends. Everything was done alone. I wasn't lonely, having gotten used to it from a young age. People say I'm difficult to approach and get along with, but they never really tried to get to know me. I entered high school. The classmates I interacted with changed. Being bad at socializing, I buried myself in studies, so their initial curiosity about me turned into indifference. Nobody said I was bad. Nobody said I was good, except for having good grades. I felt nothing, thinking the days ahead would be no different from before. School, extra classes, learning pharmacology, everything was routine and predictable, but I seemed to be mistaken. After school one day, she came to find me. The classroom was empty, and she sat beside me with a school bag on her back. She thanked me for testifying. I said there was no need to thank me. I usually finished my homework before leaving. I thought she would leave like everyone else, but she just sat there quietly, looking at me after she got off work, and then looked at me. Her expression was calm, but my pen in hand was clenched. She almost started talking as soon as I finished the last word. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my shirt, looking at me with a smile. She said she wanted to treat me to bubble tea. I subconsciously said there was no need. I was used to finishing my homework before going home, assuming she would leave like others. But she surprised me by sitting quietly beside me and looking at me. She never vented her bad mood on others, but digested quietly. She was good, but I didn't want her to be unhappy. I loved listening to her stories. She would secretly bring snacks violating school rules. She would secretly take me to secluded places to enjoy the snacks, only to be found out. The homeroom teacher asked me in the office how I suddenly got spoiled. He was quite upset. I raised my head and asked him why this was considered spoiled behavior. I said I didn't think so. A dull and tasteless life was suddenly disrupted. I didn't feel spoiled. I knew about Edward for the first time on a field trip, the whole school went, and instinctively, I tried to find her. I asked students from his class, and he said she had left with Edward, so he pointed me in the direction. The mountain road was rugged, but I eventually found her. She was alone, disheveled like a little wildcat, but even seeing me, she was still smiling. She asked why I came. She twisted her ankle, with cuts on her hands. I had never hated anyone before, but seeing her like this, I suddenly didn't look favorably upon this. Edward, I was angry. He shouldn't have left her alone in such a place. I squatted in front of her, wanting to carry her back. She looked at me and then at her leg. Finally, she climbed onto my back carefully. She was light, but she whispered thank you and sorry in my ear. Her voice was soft, telling me about the scenery she saw along the way, the gentle airflow brushing my ears. I couldn't quite hear what she was saying. I just felt my heart beating fast, fists clenched, unsure where to put them. Niall, why are your ears so red? Stiffening for a moment, I knew my ears were even redder. When I turned around, I saw a boy not far away, Edward. He was the one who left Bertha here, so he didn't leave, but thinking of the injuries on Bertha, I still felt a bit angry. I turned away and walked out of there step by step, carrying Bertha on my back. I liked Bertha. When she visited me after school and chatted about trivia, instead of focusing on my homework, I realized that I liked her. That year passed quickly. My parents told me they had arranged for me to study abroad. They wanted me to transfer schools. I never questioned the choices they made for me, but this time I asked why. They paused and said it was for my own good. I said I was okay now. I didn't want to go. They didn't listen to me, deregistered me from school without my knowledge, bought a plane ticket. The night before leaving, I took out the cup I made a long time ago. Though I never believed in these things, I still had a trace of selfishness. So I wrote a letter, wanting to tell Bertha I liked her, not necessarily to be together. I just didn't want her to forget me. I wanted her to know my feelings. Bertha wasn't there, but her desk mate, Edward, was. The driver urged me to hurry. Time was running out. I could have asked Edward to pass it on, but I didn't want to. I really didn't. It felt like if I did, I would lose a lot. I missed the plane, but I waited for Bertha. I handed her the letter and the cup. She blinked at me. Words were on the tip of my tongue, but I pursed my lips, not knowing what to say, so my ear tips turned red. She glanced at the driver behind me, asking if I was leaving. I nodded, saying I was going to study abroad. Her brows furrowed, and I saw her fingers fidgeting with the paper. She asked if she wouldn't see me again. I pursed my lips. She seemed like she wanted to say something more, but I stepped forward and hugged her. I didn't dare embrace too tightly, my face red. I said I would contact her and visit her during breaks. As I left, I took back the letter and replaced it with one containing my contact information. She didn't need to know I liked her. What I feared was her not staying in touch. As always, she shared the little happenings of her day with me in emails. Although brief, I was still delighted. There were hardly any bubble tea shops abroad, so I attempted to make it myself. Every time I felt troubled, I would make it, because seeing bubble tea would unconsciously remind me of her. Bertha is like a little sun, capable of dispelling many troubles. During the summer after Bertha graduated, I returned to my home country to find her. As I walked to her home, I saw her sitting on the doorstep, leaning against a sycamore tree, painting. I wanted to approach her, but I saw a boy not far away, Edward. Bertha told me she ranked second in her school, but she wanted to stay local to better accompany her mom. She also mentioned not knowing why the student who ranked first also decided to stay local. The top student was Edward. I knew Edward liked Bertha. That's why he appeared there. Niall. I heard Bertha call out to me, seeing her put down her paintbrush and sketchbook to run towards me, her eyes sparkling, asking why I had suddenly come back. I extended my hand carefully to flatten the strand of hair that Bertha had pushed up, telling her I was on holiday and had come to fulfill my promise to see her. I made her a cup of homemade milk tea, which she really liked. That made me very happy. Bertha took me to many places. We walked shoulder to shoulder, and I could reach out and touch her fingertips. As we parted ways, I took the opportunity to hug her again, holding her tighter than the last time. I told her that I liked her. She looked at me somewhat bewildered. Slowly, I reached out and covered her eyes with my hand, telling her to wait for me. Bertha told me she hoped I would become a very skilled doctor, so I applied to the best medical school, and even though I didn't return to my home country and be by her side, I didn't want to disappoint her. I often made time to go back and see her. She hadn't changed much, still optimistic and positive. Whenever she saw me, her eyes would light up. There was an exchange program at school with my home country. I applied and got accepted. I didn't inform her in advance the day I returned. I arrived at her school. She and her friends came out of the dormitory, and she spotted me right away. She looked surprised. She walked over and asked if I had been accepted. I nodded with a smile, and she smiled even brighter, saying she wanted to celebrate. Her friend asked if she was still going to the project on Edward sighed. She took my hand, shook her head without hesitation, so I became even happier. I finally got to be by Bertha's side. I could listen to her talking about trivial things by my side, turn around, and I could see her, reach out, and I could touch her. My heart was full. One time during an outing, Bertha suddenly told me she had a headache. Unconsciously, immense fear and panic surged within me. I immediately took her for a checkup. While waiting for the report, we sat on a bench in the hospital. I was ice cold all over. She held my hand to reassure me that everything would be fine. She said, "It's my report that's coming out. Why are you more nervous than me?" I didn't know why. I didn't know how to describe it. It felt like I had experienced it before. The fear of being judged, slowly watching something beloved fade away in front of my eyes, feeling helpless and in pain, the numbness and confusion after having a large piece of my heart torn away. The report came out. The doctor said Bertha was fine. The tension in my heart dissipated. I held her hand and reminded her of many things in detail, but she blinked at me, poking my cheek with her finger. She said, "Nial, you seem like an old man." I was still worried and had her undergo several more checkups. Thankfully, all the reports came out fine. The seniors in the team couldn't help but tease me upon finding out. "Yeah, Bertha is so good. How could heaven bear to let her suffer?" As the project was wrapping up, I was about to go abroad again. The day before I left happened to be Edward's birthday. She said she wanted to give him a gift before coming out. Bertha had told me about the relationship between them, so the gift was something we picked out together. However, I waited a long time and didn't see her coming out, worried that something had happened to her. I went in as well. I saw Edward gripping Bertha's hand tightly, and she couldn't break free. I punched him in the face, asking Bertha if she was all right. She shook her head. I shielded her behind me. "Why do you always manage to get ahead?" "She clearly liked me first." Edward asked me, his eyes very red, but I didn't answer. I couldn't afford to be patient with Edward. As I wasn't Bertha, I didn't look at him, and I didn't look at him again, holding Bertha's hand as I walked out. Once we were in the car, I straightened her sleeve that had been pushed up due to the tugging. I sighed. "Bertha, do you like Edward?" She shook her head, so I reached out and smoothed the stray hair at her temple. "Do you like me then?" She seemed surprised by my question. Her ears were turning red, but I wanted to say the things I had always wanted to say. "Can we be in a relationship?" She froze, blinking at me. We locked eyes in silence. The confidence I had slowly dispersed under her gaze. I didn't know where to put my hand or what to say, but suddenly, I heard a light chuckle. Bertha reached out and pinched my face. "Boyfriend, your face is so red, even redder now." We continued to text and video call as we did before. However, the way we addressed each other changed. Bertha no longer called me Nial. She called me boyfriend. Every time I had a break, I would go back to see her, but each trip saw us progress from walking side by side to holding hands. We went to many places together. She also took me to meet her mom and Edward's mom. We held hands, embraced, and then kissed. I was overjoyed, and I loved her very much. Eventually, I returned from abroad. It rained continuously during the first few days back. Finally, one day, the sky cleared up. It happened to be during the fireworks festival. I took her hand, and we went to watch the fireworks together. The fireworks burst vibrantly, dazzling us. I looked at her. She was focused on watching the fireworks, her eyes full of brilliance. The fireworks were fleeting, but I wanted to spend every year with her. "Bertha, Bertha," she looked at me. I squeezed her palm, bent down, and kissed her lips. "I love you."